Question: does St. Louis suffer from relative deprivation? Data suggests that St. Louis is among the cities in the U.S. with the highest murder and crime rates. Yet, at the same time, the data also suggests that St. Louis is among the cities with the highest income inequalities and disparity. This is the Neoliberal Round Podcast. I'm Ronaldo McKenzie. We'll be right back after this. This is a very important point because I'm following the story with a recent story in the news with the 19-year-old who killed two persons in a high school in South St. Louis, a teenage girl. In fact, I tweeted just now, and if I could find that tweet, I said in a tweet recently, the shooting in St. Louis at a high school led to the deaths of an adult and teenage girl. The suspect is a 19-year-old boy. Now, I went on to say, to provide some backdrop, St. Louis murder rates are the highest in the U.S., suffers from rising poverty, fallen median incomes and inequality. And then I put relative deprivation because I just did an excerpt at a podcast. The last podcast I did, it was looking at relative deprivation, a way of looking at and dealing with and understanding crime and violence. So when I started to put this particular shooting in perspective, and it is very tragic that this has happened, but we have to we have to put it into perspective because we have to deal with the issue of crime and violence, especially amongst our young people. And of course, we carried a poll asking asking people what is causing the violence in cities, and many of the discussions and the interviews we've had alluded to 4 or 5 general themes which we post to people. Some people, whether is it lack of parenting and mentors? Is it because of access to guns? Is it inability to control self? And most people, of course, responded saying that lack of responsible parenting and mentors. That's not the point I'm trying to I'm making here. But the whole issue of relative deprivation. And if you listen to the last podcast, I defined relative deprivation. When we talk about relative deprivation, we talk about societies with higher levels of income inequality, tend to have higher levels of crime and violence. And that's the relative deprivation concept within social materialist idea concept. But it is true in a sense, because look what has happened here. You start to study what's going on in St. Louis. So I started to do some research about counties with high levels of poverty, and of course St. Louis and the highest crime. St. Louis is recent data is showing that St. Louis has the highest crime rate, murder rates in the country, in the U.S. Cities with the highest crime rates, St. Louis is number 1. Okay, but when you look at what's the poverty rate, you don't see St. Louis anywhere. When you try to find out when you try to research poverty, the cities with the places with the highest levels of poverty, You're not going to find St. Louis in the top 10 or the top 20. You will not. Okay? Because you need to understand St. Louis. And I had a chance. I lived in that particular part of the country many years ago, in 2006. So I have an understanding of this whole issue of gentrification and what was going on and how St. Louis was expanded and had some outer counties. And when data is collected, they include those counties where nothing happens in those particular external counties. But when you look at income inequality, and then when you dig deep and start to study South St. Louis and those poor neighborhoods of color, then you see the poverty level. In fact, so you won't find that. But when you start to study deeper, go deeper into St. Louis and look at the various areas, is that there's a lot of wealth in St. Louis, in certain communities, not communities of color, or communities, not black and brown communities, okay? And within St. Louis, there's a lot going on within the communities there. So the communities of color, in the small pockets of communities of color there, experience high levels of poverty levels that's even higher than the country. But it's part of the general poverty level. But when data is reported, they're not included because it's taken as part of the entire St. Louis. But poverty, but let's look at income inequality, the income inequality levels and unemployment levels. Income inequality and unemployment levels. Because I just actually did some research looking at the poverty levels in St. Louis and unemployment. And data suggests, and this is coming from a study that was done by the Brookings Institute. And I'm going to first report to you in terms of the poorest cities in the U.S. Crime and violence continues to spiral out of control, and the perpetrators are young men 10 to 25 who constitute the age group with the highest rates of arrests for all offenses, and especially violent crimes, murders, and robberies. That's according to a data that we have been studying and we obtained, and were able to look at the numbers and put the figures together, and was able to produce that analysis for you. Now, recently, 2 persons were killed and 7 others were injured after a lone gunman, 19-year-old African-American Orlando Harris, went to his former high school, Central Visual and Performance Arts, with a long gun. Harris killed 16-year-old Alexandria Bell, who was a beautiful young lady with a promising career in the visual and performing arts. I understand that she had an amazing smile, and we actually obtained picked images of her, and there's images of this particular incident all over social media, all over the internet. Now, the second person that Harris killed was Jean Kuska, a 61-year-old physical ed teacher, who I understand from her daughter, reports from her daughter is that she's been working at the school since 2008, or she's been a teacher since 2008 and working since 2008 at that particular CVPA, and she enjoys cross country. And there are images of her, 61-year-old woman. She loves to cross country, and she rides her bike all over the country, and she participates in cross country events. But those 2 women are dead today. Now, the question on all our minds after this is another shooting. And why did he do this? Why would a young man with no prior criminal record become so violent that he would be so enraged as to turn his former school into a battleground? That's the question. Now, according to reports from eyewitnesses and victims, the gunman shouted just before he started to shoot, "You're all going to die." Another student heard him say, I'm tired of this expletive school, and I hate this expletive school. Tanya Golston, who is 16, was in the dance class when the shooting started. According to her, he said, and I quote, "I'm tired of this damn school, and I'm tired of everybody in this damn school," she said. Now, if those words reveal anything, it is that Harris was frustrated and troubled and seemed to blame the school and sought to resolve the problem through what he believed was the only way that resolved the problems. For Harris, the school was the source of his problem or challenges and sought to kill everyone except the ballet teacher, Raymond Harris. Now, that was inconsistent with his statement that everybody was going to die at this school, yet he stopped short of killing this particular teacher. And this needs further investigation and understanding as to why he changed his mind about this teacher. Nevertheless, he carried out his heinous plan, but due to quick response by the police, was taken out before he could continue his rampage. Now, press conference reports by the local police suggested that there are unconfirmed reports that Harris had a mental illness in the past, but this has not been confirmed, and investigators are still exploring motive. Moreover, the issue of motive goes beyond Orlando Harris and must be situated within the wider concern that crime and violence continues to spiral out of control, and that the perpetrators are young men like Orlando, ages 10 to 25, who constitute the age group with the highest rates. In retrospect, social movement theory, as we explore, we're not looking at motive, but looking at this whole issue of crime and violence spiraling out of control, especially among young people 10 to 25. And I'm saying to you, in retrospect, as we look back, social movement theory within Marxist materialist school of thought advances or had advanced a concept known as relative deprivation, and you might have heard me talk about this relative deprivation, which is a very important concept, a very important rationale to dealing with and understanding crime and violence of this nature. Social movement theory asserts that when one begins to see other people, they begin to compare themselves, drawing conclusions about themselves relative to that position or to their position and that position. Example, we conclude previously that the experience and nature of poverty differs from place to place, so that a person may not feel or think, and therefore may not act poor, until they find themselves in another context or see other experiences that clashes with theirs. This theory then leads to a conclusion from scientific research and various studies within social Marxist materialism of relative deprivation, where a society of higher income inequality or societies with higher income inequality are more prone to higher crime rates than communities that have lower income inequality. Now today, US national data and Pew Research studies show that crime has spiked and that much of it occurs within certain cities and communities. The cities that have experienced rapid increases in violent crimes with a weapon and robberies are among the poorest, with higher levels of people of color, including St. Louis, Missouri, where CVPA, Central Visual and Performance Art School, is located. St. Louis overtook Detroit recently as the most violent cities, as the place with the most murders or violent crimes. So right now, today, St. Louis is the most violent city. It recently overtook Detroit as the most violent city in the U.S. with the highest murder rates. While at the same time, St. Louis is among the cities with the highest inequality and disparities, with a Gini coefficient of or between 0.9 and 1.2, I would say up to 1.5, suggesting significant inequality between the richest and poorest households or wealth and incomes. Let me put this into perspective, and for those of us who understand, who have read my book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, which is an economic analysis that looks at income inequality and poverty between not just peoples within a particular society, but between the global south and the global north, and even peoples within those society. And one of the ways you study income inequality, you can use what is known as the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient studies elasticity of income inequality, or studies income inequality and its elasticity, or the level, or the levels of income inequality. If it is 0, it means that it's perfect. It's perfect. That's a perfect society. It means that there is no inequality. If it's minus, it means, it means that there is absolutely no income inequality. But if it's anywhere above 0, there is some level of income inequality. But when you go from 0, when you go to 1, but anyway from 0, a couple of years ago when I studied at University of Pennsylvania, and as I wrote the book and my thesis was looking at income inequality, working with people such as Martin Oppenheimer and others, looking at societies and how unevenness of wealth and incomes and so on and so forth. And when you look at income in post-industrial countries, it was hovering around 0.45. But when you go to but when you look at the European countries or Scandinavian countries, there's less unevenness or income inequality, but there's also less crime and violence in those societies, in the Scandinavian countries. You look at what's going on in Jamaica, black and brown communities and so on, and study societies where there's high levels of crime and violence and instability. You also find that there's high levels of poverty, high levels of income inequality. And when you studied, and some years, and of course I need to do an update of that book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, looking at income inequality. What does the Gini coefficient suggest? But the Gini coefficient suggests usually most societies hover around 0.45. That's what you want. That's okay. But when you look at St. Louis City, and even Philadelphia and so on, where there's high, you find the income disparities are stark, and it's moving from 0.45 beyond 0.7, beyond 0.8. Now it's in St. Louis, it's at up to 1.2. 1.2 is extremely high. When you start going beyond 0.7, that's extremely high. We actually have the figures here. And I was able to obtain some figures and some data that shows median income or net worth and wealth for people of color as against Caucasians. So the cities that has experienced rapid increases in violent crime with a weapon and robberies are among the poorest, with higher levels of people of color, including St. Louis, Missouri, where CVPA is located. And of course, it said St. Louis overtook Detroit as the most violent city in the U.S., with the highest murder rate. While at the same time, St. Louis is among the cities with the highest inequality and disparity, with a Gini coefficient of 0.9 up to 1.2, 1.5, suggesting significant inequality between the richest and poorest households, wealth, and incomes. In fact, the Federal Reserve Bank data reports that from 2014 to 2020, there's been a steady gain in wealth among white Americans, but people of color have little to no change since the 1990s. Further, between 2020 to 2022, not only have white Americans net worth increased, but it has skyrocketed, spiking upward drastically, which explains the almost vertical blue slope in the figure and the data that we're looking at. And we're going to have this article available in the Neoliberal Post at ReinaldoCMcKenzie.com, and also in the Neoliberal blog at theneoliberal.com. We will also have copies of it available in our feeds and so on. But this spike, but let me read it again. Between 2020 to 2022, not only has white Americans' net worth increased, but it has skyrocketed, spiking upward drastically, which explains the almost vertical blue slope in the figure below, or in the figure that we have. This spike occurred during COVID. The spike occurred during COVID between 2019, and yet median incomes are falling and poverty rising, and this seems to be correlating to the spike in violent crimes with a weapon. In addition, unemployment in St. Louis area and city are higher than the national average. And I have the figure here, and I'm looking at the unemployment figure here according to the BLS local area unemployment stats. It says that I'm looking at in the United States, unemployment as at August 2021 was at 5.3. In August 2022, it stood at 3.8. But let's look at St. Louis City, Missouri. Unemployment last year was at 6.9. Remember, in all of United States, it's at 5.3, but in St. Louis City alone, it's at 6.9. And now, the federal level, as at August 2022, 3.8. In St. Louis City, Missouri, 4.1. Madison, 5.2. These are black areas. These are black communities. We'll be right back after these messages. Now let's look at the average household net worth by race and ethnicity. Among African Americans, they have been in terms of their net worth in terms of race and ethnicity among Black and Hispanics, there's been no change. It's been $200,000. $200,000, that's net worth. But in terms of when you look at Caucasian, it has grown from just above 500,000 to now over $1.2 million, $1.292 million. Now, it has, in fact, it has spiked significantly between 2020 and 2020, and to now, between 2020 and now, during COVID, between 2020, there was a slight drop between 2008 to 2009-10. That's during the recession, just before Barack Obama. And since Barack Obama took over in 2010, it's been rising. But since 2016, and especially in 2020, it has spiked significantly. There's not an upward slope. It's a spike. So crime and violence has risen significantly. In fact, St. Louis has the highest crime rate in the country. It's among the poorest in the country, St. Louis City. Okay, unemployment outstripped the national levels. Let's look at home ownership. Home ownership in St. Louis City. as against St. Louis County. St. Louis City, 35% home ownership. 35% home ownership. And in St. Louis City, among African Americans, among Caucasians, 64%. St. Louis County is even worse, 80% among Caucasian African Americans, 46% in St. Louis County. And then there's median home value, which $250,000 to $100,000 and $170,000 to $65,000. That's comparatively between white and black median home value. Let's look at student loan debt. African Americans average $52,726. Caucasians $28,000. I mean, inequality or the divide is stark, and especially during COVID, there has been significant increase. This is what you call relative deprivation. This is part of the problem, coupled with, of course, the issue of parenting and so on and so forth. And as I said, it leads into these. This is what we need to also tackle as a society. This is the Neoliberal Podcast. We have an update as it relates to the St. Louis school gunman who killed the two persons. Had an AR-15 style weapon and 600 rounds of ammo. That's news coming in from the Baltimore Sun by Michael Phillips and Jim Salter of the Associated Press, as at October 25th, 2022 at 3:27 p.m. According to the story, St. Louis, the 19-year-old gunman who killed a teacher and a 15-year-old girl at St. Louis High School was armed with an AR-15 style rifle and what appeared to be more than 600 rounds of ammunition, Police Commissioner Michael Sack said in a press conference on Tuesday. Now, Orlando Harris also left behind a handwritten note offering his explanation for the shooting Monday at Central Visual and Performing Arts Art High School. 10th grader Alexandra Bell and 61-year-old physical education teacher Jean Guska died, and 7 students were wounded before police killed Harris in exchange of gunfire. Now, Sack read Harris's note in which the young man lamented that he had no friends, no family, no girlfriend, and a life of isolation. In the note, Harris called it the perfect storm for a mass shooter. Sack said Harris had some ammo strapped to his chest, some in a bag, and other magazines were found dumped in stairwells. This is quite interesting, and so that's the latest news that's coming in. That's coming in here. According to the Baltimore Sun, again, I'm going to say that according to the Baltimore Sun, news coming in is that the young man, Orlando Harris, the shooter, left a note, and the note said, and I'm going to read the note here if I could find it again. The note said that he lamented that he had no friends, no family, no girlfriend, and a life of isolation. A life of isolation. Quite sad. And so he decided to take it out on his school, his alma mater, killing these two individuals. One who a girl of promise, one who is living out her dreams and looking to retire. And he decided to end lives and create mayhem at his school. It's quite sad that what's happening. It's quite sad that what's happening. This feeling of loneliness, this feeling of isolation, this feeling of no worth. We talk about the whole issue of self-efficacy in one of our episodes and one of our writings in the blog, and the importance of this feeling, the looking at people's perspective of themselves. And we talk about relative deprivation and talking. We keep driving home that fact of relative deprivation and the whole issue of people's position in life and how that is affected by what's going on around them and what's happening around them, and how society facilitate that need, that drive for a particular lifestyle, and then the disparities in society in terms and the position that one have and the position that one is hoping to realize in relation to how one mirrors and judge and adjudicates oneself. That can create estrangement. It creates false hope, some false illusion. But then we have a society that facilitates and cultivates resolving issues through violence, with the stimuli around us, and this loss of the sense of morality and ethics and conscience cultivated by matters of faith, matters of love, matters of morality. But those things are now being drowned out by other things. This is the Neoliberal Realm Podcast. Thank you for listening to the show today. Please, if you would like to participate in the show, we have a poll. We will have a poll on Twitter. We will have a poll on some of our social media feeds, Reddit. We will also have it on the podcast on Spotify. You can listen to the podcast on the Spotify platform, and we will also post comments on other platforms. We're available on Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Podvine HQ. Did we say Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music and Google Podcasts already? And of course, we are a podcast from Anchor.fm by Spotify, and we appreciate and want to thank all those platforms. And also, you can just say we're also available on the Alexa app and the Alexa device. You can also visit us at ReinaldoCMcKenzie.com and theneoliberal.com. And you can listen to the show that way. This particular show will be available as an article, as I said before, and we have several articles that we have to share, we will do some update on the neoliberal.com and ReinaldoCMcKenzie.com and have several new articles and journals, a fresh look. Visit us and check out what we have to offer. The book Neoliberalism, available in all formats. Also check out our web services, search engine optimization through our IT people at Ants Business Solutions. Check out our website. Go to ReinaldoCMcKenzie.com over to grow your business. And I think we're at the bottom. And then you can check out the website, or you can go to antsbusinesssolutions.com, and spelled ANTZ. And of course, we're available if you're interested in podcast production, learning about podcast production, research, paper writing services, publishing services. We're available. And then, of course, we provide those services. And we have my second book coming out, which is Neoliberalism Reconsidered. Continue to support us at https:// the neoliberal anchor.fm/the neoliberal/support. And of course, you can subscribe to the show for free and share the show with your friends and send us a comment and let us know how we're doing and how we can improve. Thank you for listening. Walk good.